There it is. Everybody take a good look at it. Your official 2020 Atlantic Coast Conference schedule, what they call model. Go ahead, take a snapshot of it because it might change before we get to September. Hello, I'm John Rawl, and this is the Yall Show. Talk with a Southern accent, and it's great to have you on board as we're back here to discuss all things Atlantic Coast Conference with the show that covers the ACC and the rest of all that goes on in college athletics. We do it right here at Yall.com, and when we talk about the ACC, we bring on our longtime pal, our ACC insider for 247sports.com and CBS Sports Digital, and that would be Jonathan Leifheit, and he's here to talk about ACC football. We hope getting ready to kick off here in a short time. Jonathan, welcome back to the show, man. It's good to see you.
Thank you much. It's good to be here. Been a little bit. We haven't had a whole lot to talk about, but boy, this week did they ever release the hounds on things to talk about.
They have done that and a whole lot more. We're going to have a good conversation chatting with you about what exactly is happening in the Atlantic Coast Conference. First things first, before we forget, Jonathan, we do have to say one bit of off-the-field news from the ACC since you and I last got together, and that was the announcement that John Swofford would be retiring as ACC commissioner. So before we go head first into all that football talk, your thoughts on that announcement?
Well, you know, he's been the commissioner, gosh, for a very long time now, and been in the ACC. I mean, he's a North Carolina guy. Was the AD at North Carolina, and then moved up to be the commissioner. So he's been kind of in charge through a really, really huge, turbulent time of change in the ACC. He, oversaw the expansion, both expansions. We had the first one where we saw Virginia Tech and Miami added, and then we had Syracuse and Pitt, and Boston College also in there as well, and really just a big turbulent time in terms of what's gone on, and so he's kind of led us through that, and I think he kind of sensed it was time for him to move along and kind of enjoy himself. So the next commissioner comes in, and as many challenges as Swofford faced, I think the landscape is going to be completely different as we move forward. So who they pick is going to face their share of challenges, especially kind of in the wake of the whole coronavirus thing. That is going to present, I think, some long-lasting and long-term implications and changes within the sports world.
And what a parting gift for Swofford as he heads out the door, having to deal with this pandemic here in his last year. And he'll be on duty throughout this fall. He'll be leaving in 2021. But, Jonathan, let's move on now to talk about what happened here this week as the ACC on Wednesday announced this schedule model where each of the ACC teams plays a 10-conference game schedule plus one non-conference opponent, assuming they do schedule that non-conference opponent. So that's a twist there. And then the addition of Notre Dame as a conference member for the year 2020. And all the other things, just how do you rate what happened and anything else that we might be missing on this release from Wednesday on the 2020 model?
I think they handled it probably, in my opinion, about as good as you can. I mean, their big concern was, one, level playing field with whomever they come up against in terms of the testing and whatnot. But two, they did have an honest concern about the athletes, so they wanted to make sure that they put the best protocols in place, and the way you can ensure that and control that is to largely schedule within the conference. And it also gives them, if something unforeseen happens, and things escalate or things happen, or a particular team is hit pretty hard, it gives them some flexibility in what they can do, because it's a conference schedule, so folks are going to be willing to kind of move and deal with it. They did maintain the +1 out of conference schedule, which ironically I believe was done so that for the SEC schools that had SEC kind of out of in-state rivalries could maintain that. And then in a bit of irony, the SEC comes out and says, Nope, we're just playing conference games. So now everybody will be looking for an out-of-conference opponent. So a big change right there. I thought that was a really interesting move by the ACC and SEC and how they set that up.
Yeah, quite a shock when the SEC on Thursday came out with that announcement because, again, we thought that the ACC was doing what they did to preserve the Georgia, Georgia Tech, Clemson,
Yep.
South Carolina, Louisville, Kentucky, and FSU, Florida. And here, as the ACC homers would say, the SEC chickened out. What do you think about that?
You know, I've thought it and probably should have said it, but it's going to be funny. Certainly, regardless of why they did it, and I haven't really had a chance to see why they did it, but regardless of why they did it, I think folks are going to certainly give them no slack about it and give them the business as they should, as much as they have crowed about their superiority in years past.
Jonathan, they chickened out. Let's just go ahead and call it what it is, sir. Yeah, that sure did. But I did see one of the SEC pundits say, well, look, chances are out of those 4 SEC ACC contests, the SEC would be favored in 3 of the 4 contests. That's what one person said, and I assume they're talking about.
Yeah, but that's why they play the games, John.
That's true. That's true. And they're talking, I think, about the Clemson Tigers probably favored over those. Speaking of chickens, they're home state SEC representative. But that is the case where the SEC is going to go to a 10-game conference-only model, and the ACC, at least right now, saying they're going to go 10+1. And I'm trying to remember, let's see, the Big Ten was the first conference, I think, to come out and say they were playing conference only, and then the Pac-12 followed pretty close behind.
Yep.
Now, both of those 2 Power 5 conferences, are they only playing 10 games?
Yes, that's the way I understand it. That they were planning to do that, and they will still maintain their postseason championships in some form or fashion.
So, with that in mind, as of this recording, as of this live broadcast, whenever you're catching us, Jonathan, is the ACC the only Power 5 conference that's right now saying they're going to play 11 regular season games?
The Big 12 right now is planning to play 12.
Oh, are they?
They're going to play their normal. Actually, they're looking at playing the normal schedule that they already had in place. So they're going to do the 9 conference games in 3+3. So they are looking at that. They are doing some interesting things in that they actually have accelerated the start of the season by moving as many games into what is being called week 0, which is kind of that for the weekend before Labor Day, moving some games there so that if they need to, they can kind of make some adjustments. But as I understand it, they're going to play all the games they have.
All right. Well, again, it's a moving situation. I think the term would be fluid, and I don't think any of us can guarantee what they announced this week's going to actually play out the way they project it. But they got to make some decisions, and that's the reason they're doing this. Now, the SEC did one thing I think the ACC did not do. They actually announced a so-called start date, which is around September 26th, something like that. Has the ACC come out and said when they're going to start their season?
Actually, they have.
Okay.
They're going to start. All fall sports will start the week of September through the September 7th through the 12th. And I did not look and see what Saturday that was, but I can look real quick and tell you that the first game will be on the 12th of September.
Okay, so that's the weekend following Labor Day weekend.
Yep.
So they're pushing it back a little bit. To the ACC's credit, they're again, everybody trying to push this thing a little bit further on down the road if they can, and safety, I'm sure, a big part of the reason. Jonathan, what are you hearing from your fans there on the message boards and more at 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital? Are the fans? Are they okay with what's going on right now?
Yeah, everybody is. Everybody understands this is kind of a very it is unique. I mean, I don't think we've seen anything close to this ever in the history of it. Maybe 100 years ago when they had the Spanish flu pandemic that went around and killed so many folks. That's the last time we've seen anything like this, and this is really a different world at this point. So. Everybody's understanding. Everybody seems to be really kind of willing to roll with whatever folks decide to do and go with it. And it's hard to be critical in such a situation with so much on the line. And seems like most people are kind of following that motto.
And since you mentioned the 1918 and 1919 Spanish influenza, Jonathan, I got to give a lot of credit to the Institute, Georgia Tech, because that famous photo of people attending a Georgia Tech game back in 1918 and 1919 wearing masks. It's an old. It looks like they came right out of the battlefields of World War I, attending a Georgia Tech football game wearing masks. If they could do it 102 years ago, we can do it now.
Yep. And I think we'll see probably significantly reduced capacity, probably 25 to 33% capacity for all stadiums, which is going to make it really interesting in terms of who gets to sit where and who does what. But I think we are going to see football. Obviously, we still don't have any kind of indicator from most of the schools as to how they're going to handle seating and tickets, and if there is going to be such thing as tailgating, or if they'll just completely disallow it, or what's going to happen. So, still a lot to wait and see how things go.
And as we said, the buzzword, of course, is fluid. And just because they've announced the plan here as we roll into the month of August doesn't mean it's going to actually play out that way. We all hope so. So speaking of that plan, let's go to what they call the 2020 ACC schedule model. And if you have a question for Jonathan about how things are going to play out in the ACC this year, or whatever the other thoughts were going into this plan, feel free to hit us up right now at the Yall Show. But let's take a kind of quick dive into what they announced here this week with this model. And Jonathan, there you have it. It has the traditional 14 ACC football playing schools, but it also includes, for the first time ever, Notre Dame as a conference member of the ACC for the 2020 football season. And perhaps part of the reason, Jonathan, for that was to kind of help even things out, and the fact that Notre Dame needs opponents.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the ACC has a pretty strong relationship with Notre Dame, given that they're a member in every sport but football. And Notre Dame, they have a lot of, they were, already losing several of their opponents, including, USC and Stanford. I know they were playing some teams out of the Big Ten as well. They were losing them. I think they were down to 3. They were basically down to the 6 ACC games that they had. And I don't know that they were going to get past maybe 7 or 8. So for them, this is a good move. And for the ACC, it's a good move as well. And, the way the ACC has kind of decided to do it is, instead of breaking the teams into 2 divisions, they're basically going to take the 2 highest, the 2 teams with the best record, and they will play for the ACC Championship in December. So there will be no divisions. And if you look down the schedule for most teams, it's a 5-5, 5 home games, 5 away games. A lot of teams are picking up teams that maybe they haven't played in a while. And dropping, in some cases, dropping teams that they play every year. Georgia Tech, as an example, will pick up Boston College and FSU, as teams that they rarely get to play. NC State's another one. And then they won't see Virginia Tech or UNC on their schedule at all, nor do they see Virginia. So there's 3 teams out of their division that are gone. So it's going to be a big difference, I think, from that perspective, in who the teams play. It'll be a shakeup. And then it'll also be different in that there is no coastal or Atlantic. So we can at least eliminate the coastal chaos for 1 year. But it will be the 2 best teams that play in the championship this year.
I think you just answered one of these 2 questions that have come in from one of our viewers, Chuck Walker. And one of those questions would be, how will 15 teams balance? Do you think you've answered that question with what you just said, Jonathan? How will the 15 teams balance? Maybe you have, maybe you have. Also, Chuck's asking, Jonathan, will Notre Dame stay in the ACC beyond 2020? Well, I think I can partially answer that question. I think their athletic director came out and pretty much said that this is a an extraordinary time where they're doing this conference thing here this year with the ACC just as a one-off, if you will, from a football perspective. So I think that again is coming from the Notre Dame athletic director. Of course, Notre Dame, if you don't know, plays as an independent in football, and they've been playing 6 ACC member institutions each year for the last 4 or 5 years. And I know they were supposed to play Clemson this year for the first time in modern history. And I think they're still, according to that schedule we put up a minute ago, and I'll bring it back up here, they do have Clemson on the schedule here, according to this. Clemson playing in South Bend in the 2020 football season. So that's good news for those who might want to see Clemson playing a team like Notre Dame, a little bit more of a challenge for the Tigers and some of their other opponents that they've been playing here in recent history. If you are a Clemson hater, that is. A lot of people have accused them of having a soft schedule. Of course, being in the ACC, they certainly don't have a choice traditionally with the way that they bring on opponents. But, Jonathan, we have you back here to answer part of the question that Chuck brought up, and he wanted to know, will Notre Dame stay in the ACC beyond this upcoming football chaos? And, Jonathan Leifheit, your answer to that question about the Irish would be?
Probably not. I think things will move back to where it was prior to this year. I think this is a one-time deal. I will say that in the event that we finally do get to a place where Notre Dame does decide to go to a conference, it's pretty much now kind of a given where they're going, and that's to the ACC. Anybody that thought maybe they had a shot at getting them into the Big Ten or elsewhere, I think it's pretty clear that Notre Dame will be headed to the ACC. The other good part about the way this is coming out is that the NBC money that.
All right, slight hiccup there with Jonathan's connection. We're working through this. We all here in the corona times that we live in are having some challenges here. I want to know more about what he's got to say about that, though, the Notre Dame aspect that he brings up, and the NBC contract. Of course, they've had to my knowledge, Notre Dame is the only college in all of college athletics that has its own, pretty much one university with a broadcast network agreement, where most every other college, of course, is part of a conference, and it's the conferences that typically work out the agreements with the broadcast options. In most cases, it's with ESPN and the SEC network, and, of course, the new ACC network that was launched last year. Jonathan, got you back on here. What were you trying to tell us about the NBC package in Notre Dame? All right. Losing him again. We'll have to look that up. But, yes, so we'll go back to that schedule here for just everybody to see. It's going to be a 10-game ACC slate for every member. No divisions this year. No Atlantic, no Coastal. Everybody's kind of lumped in together. And because they are lumped in together, Jonathan, do you have an easy answer for who will actually get to play for the ACC Championship in Charlotte? What is the party answer, if you will, for who's going to be able to play in the ACC Championship? Okay, not able to get that from him right now. We're still working through again some of the problems here. We'll bring on Jonathan now via the telephone as soon as we can get him connected, if you will bear with us there. But the ACC, just like every other conference, out doing its best in this unprecedented time with the coronavirus and trying to make some sense of what's going on from a scheduling standpoint. And perhaps, as we all can hope for the best here, perhaps we will have a season that will play out at least like this. Jonathan, we're going to have to bring you on via the old way, the telephone, I think is what this thing's called. So yeah. I was asking you, and you couldn't hear me. What is the party line answer to who will actually get to play for the conference championship? How's that going to play out?
Everybody seems to believe it's going to be Notre Dame and Clemson, of course.
No, I mean, how do you qualify to win? Not who do you predict, but how does one get to go there? I guess they're going to have 10 conference games, and what if teams are all having the same record? I guess is how do they figure that out?
Well, there's a tiebreaker that goes on for each of the divisions, for the Coastal Division and for the Atlantic. It's the same tiebreaker. My assumption, and I haven't heard otherwise, is that they will use a similar tiebreaker that they have for that, in that they look at, first they'll look at, in the case of the divisions, they look at the overall record first. The second they look at is the division record. You throw that out. You won't look at that one. Third, I believe on the list is common opponents among those that are tied. So if you had two teams at 8-2, maybe you say Clemson's 10-0, and two teams at 8-2. You look at the common opponents between those 8-2 ones and see who has the better record. And then you on down the list. There's a whole list of tiebreakers, and I expect that they'll use those.
Okay, very, very clear. Of course, the Big 12 recently kind of went through a similar deal when they got away from the way they were doing their teams that they choose for their conference championship game, and they've gone back, and last year with Baylor and Oklahoma able to just get past Texas as far as who played there. So there's a little bit of history here. I'm excited, Jonathan. We're talking football. We're talking just about 5 weeks or so, and we actually might have toe meeting leather. And for those who like college football, we can only hope for the best. How closely, in your opinion, are the ACC presidents and athletic directors using Major League Baseball and the other professional sports that are currently trying to do something as a case study?
I think that's exactly where they're starting. And the interesting thing is they haven't come out with the fan portion of it. We know we're playing, but what we don't know is, well, who's going to be in the stands. And I think they're watching to see what happens with the fans on those sports that are, you got MLS and you've got, Major League Baseball and the NBA are all playing right now. So we'll see kind of, what happens with the fans in those leagues, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Well, there's that schedule again. We got it up. And the ACC, again, 10-game schedule. And you're not going to have your Georgia Techs. You're not going to have the Clemson, South Carolina games and such. And I know that's a big part of college football rivals, but this is a year that we just haven't seen anything like it. And times call for drastic maneuvers, and that's what John Swofford and the conference, other members of the conference, the presidents and chancellors all had to put on their big boy britches and figure out a plan, Jonathan. So we'll hope for the best and see how it all shapes up. Anything else ACC football or sports-wise that you need to let us know before we sign off with you, sir?
Yeah, I mean, basically it's not just the football season that will be starting. I mentioned all fall sports that would normally start will be starting the week of September 7th. Right now, it looks like basketball is going to be on, as expected. So there doesn't seem to be a deviation in that schedule. Again, I think the big thing will be, what does the fan experience look like, given that that's an indoor arena versus mostly outdoor for football. And the last time we spoke, you mentioned that roughly sometime in October is when most of the basketball teams start their heavy-duty practices. They kind of do a little bit more getting ready for their season, which typically tips off in early November, and nothing's changed on that front since we last spoke to you? Not yet. Not at this point. So that's still looks like it's going to be, on schedule. But, again, I think a lot of what's going to happen we'll continue to monitor, and we'll see what happens as we get closer. So I think the one interesting thing is going to be to watch is to see how it goes with recruiting. It does appear that, that the number of visits and that type of thing is going to be fairly limited. So I think there's going to be it's going to be an interesting fall from a recruiting standpoint, especially with, a lot of kids not even playing. Virginia, for example, state of Virginia has suspended their football until the spring, and other states are not even playing. Others are going forward, like the state of Georgia is. So going to be very interesting. Jonathan, I know schools, because they're only having a conference football schedule, they're having to cancel games. Teams are having the non-conference games get canceled. And those programs who were counting on playing a Power 5 school like a team in the ACC, they have to take that financial hit, I assume.
Are the ACC schools going to be okay? Do you know what they're going to be doing to try to make good on some of these games that are getting canceled?
Probably they'll try and reschedule them and go from there. I mean, everybody knows that this is unprecedented and certainly unforeseen circumstances. But by the same token, I mean, a lot of these companies, these are budget makers for them. These games, you take a Gardner Webb like Georgia Tech was supposed to play. I don't know if they're going to play them or not because they still do have to have. They still are going to have one out of conference game. But if they don't play, I mean, what does the contract say? Or are they going to be able to reschedule without penalty? But these teams, a lot of these teams in the group G5 and below, were all expecting to play these games and have that money come in for their budget, and now it's not. And I think the ripple effect of that downstream is going to be could be pretty significant.
Jonathan, you mentioned Georgia Tech playing the running Bulldogs of Gardner Webb, and that game, was that an early season contest?
I believe it was, yes.
So do you think these teams like Georgia Tech, who have a non-conference game that they actually can schedule, is it more beneficial for them to try to maybe play a non-conference game that might be scheduled later in the season versus early in the season?
I'm not really sure what would be better. Probably, I'm going to say later. It might be good. It depends on what you schedule too. If you go after, like Georgia Tech also had UCF on their list. If you go after a team like that, it might be better to take them early when you're more likely to be full strength. It comes down to kind of a depth issue. Playing 10 conference games, that's a lot tougher than playing 8 and having somebody out of conference that you'll have. So I think it depends on who you play as to when you want to play them. In some cases, it'll be nice to have a tune-up before you hit the meat of the schedule, which is going to be 10 games this year. In other cases, you might want to wait a little bit and catch them later so you get a breather.
Jonathan, the Jackets, non-conference opponents, Gardner Webb. You mentioned UCF. They were supposed to play Georgia. Who's that other opponent they were supposed to play this year?
Notre Dame.
Oh yeah, okay.
So they're going to play them anyway, but it'll be a conference game. So really they're losing. They're really just losing
one.
They're losing the Georgia game is the big one. UCF and Gardner Webb, both of those.
Well, they may play one of those two opponents. So
they might.
And it was Georgia. Let's kind of use marital terms here. It was Georgia that filed for divorce here this week from Georgia Tech. So Georgia Tech shouldn't feel any guilt whatsoever about that game not being played for the first time. I think in 95 years straight that one's been played. Clean old-fashioned hate is going to have to wait at least one more year. But
I think the last time it wasn't played was in like 1924. So,
gee, I wonder why. But we'll get it all straightened out. But I want to ask you, speaking of the financial aspect, do you see the ACC member institutions, are they going to be able to get through this okay financially?
I think they will, but I will say that there will be they'll be able to get. Let me just say they'll be able to get through it and survive. I don't know that I would say they'll be okay. I think they will get through it and survive, but it's going to take a number of years for some of them to get back on their feet. And some of them run kind of hairy, scary edge of how much money they have, and some of them don't have much reserves. I can tell you, being the Georgia Tech guy, Georgia Tech does not have a huge amount of money kind of sitting there awaiting. They've got a reserve fund, but I can guarantee you it's not enough to cover the amount of the loss of revenue that they're probably going to see this year. And I know there's a lot of other schools that are in a similar situation. So I think you're going to see some athletic associations that are going to be running on the bare minimum that they can to get by for a couple of years until they can get back on their feet.
Has Georgia Tech at this point announced the end of any of their sports programs like we've seen at some other colleges?
No, there's been nothing like that at this point.
All right, that's great news. I know Stanford cut out like 12 programs or something crazy like that. So fingers crossed we're going to get through this, and we'll go right back to that original graphic we had on when we started this segment. There you have it, the 2020 ACC schedule model with a championship game scheduled for either December 12th or 19th. I assume that will be at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte. Everything's up for possible modification, and there you have it. Let's hope for the best. Let's hope we have an ACC champion crowned here in a couple of months, and we know for a fact whether football is played, interrupted, and put off till later, or whatever the case, we here at Yall and the Yall Show are going to be here to cover it all. Jonathan Leifheit, we appreciate you coming on, helping us make sense of all this, and we look forward to having you back on again as we inch closer to kickoff.
Yeah, I am looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to bringing some more news to the table.
All right, we like it. All news is good news, especially when it comes from our ACC insider, Jonathan Leifheit. Thanks for watching. More of the Yall Show will be headed your way.